After a 2-week, 6-game road trip, the Carolina Hurricanes are finally homeward bound, coming back with a 6-2 record on the season after going 4-2 on the State Fair road trip. Gotta look at the road trip by the numbers to see what stood out. Who are the 3 Canes standouts from this road trip, and what's the one positive and the one negative? Well, we're going to talk about all of that here on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everyday for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hawkers, also the co-host of the Search Cast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. As you heard me say at the top of the show, we're going to be looking at the road trip by the numbers as the Canes were gone for their 6-game roadie during the North Carolina State Fair. Who were the 3 Hurricanes standouts that really stood above the rest, while there was a lot of contributions from the rest of the roster? And then what is the one negative and the one positive coming from this game? Because unfortunately, there are some good, but there was also some bad, but not terrible, though, because luckily the Hurricanes are still within a striking distance of the Metro Division with the fact that we are only 8 games into the season. But before we jump into all of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, like I said, the Carolina Hurricanes return home after going 4-2-0 on the road trip. Started off really good. Won the first 3 games in California, lost to the Vegas Golden Knights, but they did go into Colorado on a Whalers Nordiques night, and that was an absolute instant classic. I know January 3rd is going to be scheduled for a lot of people, especially with those jerseys coming back. And even after that insane game of seeing a lead, tying it up, going to overtime, then finishing in the shootout. And then on Saturday, the Hurricanes lose 3-2 to the Dallas Stars. And it's just one of those games where it was a lot of basically friendly fire and bounces the Stars got to beat the Hurricanes. But overall, you look at this road trip, it's still pretty successful when you look at the Carolina Hurricanes perspective. You come back, you went 4-2 on the road. You're 6-2 on the season. You're within like 4 points of the Devils because they did win on Sunday, and they're on an 8-game winning streak. But the thing is, their one loss was to the Hurricanes back on opening night, but you have to wait a while until you see the Devils again. But at least you're the team that gave the Devils their early blemish while they're on an 8-game heater right now. But for the Hurricanes, you still do feel pretty good about yourself because this is a team that lost. You didn't have Jacob Slavin for the entire road trip. He was gone after the Philly game. So you don't have him since October 11th against the Flyers. Following Saturday, you lose Shane Gostisbehere in the Kings game. Very unfortunate. You hate to see it. And then you roll into Colorado, already down 2 defensemen. You're kind of like, okay, you're down 2 defensemen. You're kind of, you bring Charles Alexis Legault up. You got Mike Riley and all those guys in. And then all of a sudden, before the game, Keandre Miller's out. Very surprising by a lot of people. So now you're down another defenseman. The guy you called up, and Joel Nystrom, is now in the lineup on a debut night, which ended in a shootout win, but it was just a chaotic game from start to finish. And then in that said game, you also lose William Carrier and also Eric Robinson. So now you're down like 6 of your regulars already from the jump. You lost 3 in just one day from the Colorado Avalanche. And then you go into Dallas, you're up 2-0, and unfortunately you lose 3-2. But it still says a lot about this Hurricanes team for the fact that you can lose 6 regulars. You're relying basically on your 9th defenseman to come in because you got Mike Riley, who is your 7th. You got a call-up in Charles Alexis Legault and Joel Nystrom. So like I said, you're basically down to your 8th and 9th defenseman to come in relief for you. And the effect you're having to call up Bradley Nadeau to go into the Dallas Stars game for his regular season debut, for the season at least, because he has played Hurricanes games before. And then you got Mark Jankowski coming in, like that was your only call up was Bradley Nadeau. Like there was no healthy extras. Like everyone who was available played that game against Dallas, but you still went out, got a lead on the Stars, who were 0-3-1 going into that game, and unfortunately, just lucky bounces went their way. But overall, you still got to be pretty happy about yourselves of how good this depth is for the Carolina Hurricanes. And when you look at the 6-game road trip, like I said, 4-2, a 667 winning percentage, which is pretty dang good, all things considered. And if you look at that over an 82-game stretch of just this 4-2 trip, they would be 55-27-0 on the season. But of course, this is just random numbers. The overtime games would happen. But if you extrapolate just that 6-game road trip over 82 games, 55-27. Now, they did score 21 goals, gave up 16, but they did score 3.5 per game while allowing 2.7 per game, average 33.5 shots. And this is where it gets kind of interesting because for the fact that the Hurricanes did have one power play goal on 21 chances on the entire road trip, and that one came from Seth Jarvis, but he also did score a shorthanded goal, which is pretty good, all things considered. The penalty kill went 22 for 26 on the road, and they, it's pretty good, all things considered, but they did give up 2 in the last game against Dallas. Did win 50.7% of their faceoffs. So when you look at just how the road trip went, you had a good goals per game, didn't allow a lot. Like you said, it was 21 goals for, 16 against, 201 shots. You did score a power play goal. Obviously, the fact that numbers aren't great when you're talking about, 1 for 21, but you did get a shorthanded goal. And like I said, the PK went 22 for 26. So you're looking at a road trip that, you're still winning games despite losing a bunch of guys to injury. Power play is not clicking at all. Like even Rod Burnmore said, it's just they should have won that game against Dallas, but special teams did them in because you had all those opportunities to put them away, and unfortunately could in the PK, give up 2 goals, give up a couple. But the thing was, that was just a lot of friendly fire goals. Nothing you can really do about that. Or one was the Mira Haskin second goal was on a power play, but that was just on a cross crease pass that went off Mike Riley, and then it was a tip goal that went in that Brandon Bussey couldn't save. And honestly, you can't really blame Bussey for that game against Dallas because it was a tipped shot in 2 friendly fires on a stick in a glove from your teammates. Like, honestly, I thought Bussey did a great job on the road trip. He should be 3-0. Unfortunately, he's 2-1-0, but he's really proven himself on this road trip. I think, even with Pierre Kochetkov out, the Hurricanes have to feel pretty good about themselves. So that if they have to rely on him, they can. But like I said, overall, you come out of it with 8 points out of 12. That's still pretty good, all things considered. Like I said, you have a 667 winning percentage on the road trip. You're 6-2 on the season. Your power play isn't the greatest right now. It's, under 7% on the season, but your PK is still doing pretty good overall. You're still talking about top 10 in the league. You're still scoring, and you're relying, you've got Sebastian Aho on an 8-game point streak. Nikolai Ehlers is on a 3-game point streak. They're all assists right now, but at least he's rolling. So your top line is absolutely clicking right now. Unfortunately, Seth Jarvis lost his point streak, but he's still a guy who's got 11 points on the Hurricanes through the first 8 games of the season. Like, he's top 5 in a lot of goals and points and stuff. You're feeling pretty good, the fact of where you're at with how your top line is surging really well. Like I said, you getting goals from, Jordan Stahl, Jordan Martinook, Jackson Blake, Logan Stankoven. You're getting that depth help that you really need. And honestly, the defensemen who came in to help out, Mike Riley slots in the top pairing with Sean Walker. They've done pretty well together, all things considered. You're feeling pretty happy about that. You got Nystrom and Legault coming in and, doing pretty well for the fact that those guys had their NHL debuts within a couple of days of each other, and they've done pretty solid, for the most part. Like I said, you played a very tough game against the Avalanche. You won that in the shootout. You dug deep to win there. You should have had the Dallas game. It just got unfortunate away from you. But the fact that your 8th and 9th defensemen kind of held their own is pretty solid, all things considered. The fact that a lot of guys had to step up. Sean Walker's playing over 28 minutes a night. Mike Riley's getting a bunch of time. Jalen Sheffield was getting absolutely worked in that Stars game, but everyone just kind of, pulled on the same rope. And unfortunately, you didn't get that one. You could have gone 5-1 on the roadie, but still getting 4-2. It's still good, all things considered. And yeah, like I said, the power play wasn't great. Penalty kill for the most part did all right. All in all, you have to feel pretty good about the road trip. You're coming back home finally after 2 weeks being on the road, and now it's just hopefully get some home cooking, get some rest, because the Canes didn't play Sunday, didn't play Monday. Their first game back is on Tuesday night at Lenovo Center. Hopefully Monday we know if some guys are back, but all in all, despite injuries, despite having to dig deep into the depth, the Hurricanes overall did a really solid job. That being said, who were the main standouts from this road trip? Well, stick around. We'll talk about 3 of those guys here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push, even if it's your actual team or maybe if it's your fantasy team. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so we kind of looked at the numbers on the road trip where the Hurricanes are, like I said, 4-2, 22 for 26 on the PK, unfortunately 1 for 21 on the power play. But who were the main standouts for the Carolina Hurricanes on this road trip? And obviously the first one we got to talk about, clearly, Seth Jarvis. You're talking about a guy scored 4 goals, had 4 assists, and had 8 points in 6 games. That is pretty dang good for a guy who's got 11 points on the Carolina Hurricanes right now and has 7 goals total on the season already just in 8 games. Was a +2. Scored 2 even strength goals, had a power play goal, and even had a shorthanded marker, which basically this guy Seth Jarvis can score on the 5-on-5, man advantage, and on the penalty kill. He can just score whenever, wherever, and whatever situation. Also, 2 game-winning goals to add on to his 4 there he has on the season, which last season he only had 2 total for 73 games, but this year, after 8 games, already has 4 game winners. The assist-wise, all in even strength, no power play assist, but either way, you will gladly take it. 23 shots on goal, 32 shot attempts, but his shooting percentage, 17.4%. You'd love to see it. 141 shifts, which is 23.5 per game. He played 117 minutes and 35 seconds with over those 6 games, which came out to an average of 20 minutes and 35 seconds. Face-off wise, 44.4%, 4 wins, 5 losses, 3 blocks, 4 hits, 3 takeaways, and 3 giveaways. And like I said, and throughout most of the stretch, he was on a 7-game point streak, which was, it was added on to the 5 of those games that they had into the road trip. Unfortunately, like I said, against Dallas, it ended that streak. But when you carry 5 of your 7 into the road trip, you're feeling pretty dang good about yourself. And I think when you look at Seth Jarvis, there could be a lot of conversations of how his season's going to be, because a lot of people had a good notion, okay, this could be something that you could see from Jarvis. And it's a great start, because if you're the Carolina Hurricanes, you definitely need to, get over the hump and make it to the Stanley Cup final. And when you have a guy like Jarvis being on a run that he is right now, that gives you a pretty indication, okay, we might be onto something here, and the fact that this feels different when it comes to Seth, just on where he is currently at with this run. Because like I said, you're looking at a guy who's got 7 points or 7 goals and 11 points already to start the season, and the fact that he was on that really huge point streak to kick off the year too, that gives you some good idea of the fact that you look at where this first line is of Aho, Jarvis, and Ehlers. 2 of those guys are really flying right now. Aho's got 4 goals and 10 points. He is tied for the team lead in assists with Shane Gostisbehere, who unfortunately has been out since the Kings game. But those two guys alone are a +5 combined, already scoring 11 goals together and do have 10 assists, and they're combined for 21 points. That is your top line. And now you got Nikolai Ehlers, who's now kind of getting into his zone. He's got 3 points, all assists in 8 games, but he's a +2 as well. So you've got a top line that's already a +7 and carrying 24 points combined. And the fact that now you come back home, Ehlers is kind of feeling it. He's super close to getting that first goal, but that makes you be in a good spot if you're the Hurricanes. Be like, okay, we have our top line rolling. Two of those guys were on a streak. One of them still is, and you have another one who's currently in it's a 3-gamer, but it's still a point streak to have. And that's a line that's been consistently rolling through the road trip and even through most of the season. So, they're still, it's still early on, but, maybe there's some possible Selke talks with Jarvis, because you look at what he's done defensively. You look at what he's done offensively as well. This two-way game is unreal. Like, he has clutch personified. So, yeah, it's still really early on, but, maybe there is some, rumblings of some Selke talk already because of what he's already contributed to this team. So you feel pretty good where you're at with Seth Jarvis. That being said, you got to talk about his running mate in Sebastian Aho. Usually we have seen slower starts to seasons for Seabass, and luckily for this one, I'm really glad the fact that he's kind of on a run right now. Like I say, he's on an 8-game point streak, hasn't missed a game without putting a point up, and the fact that the first 2 games, the first 3 games actually were all assists, but you're feeling pretty good about yourself. So you're talking about, okay, 4 points in the first 3 games. That's a really good start for Aho. And then you look at where he's at on this road trip. 4 goals, 3 assists, 7 points. He's a +2. None are on the power play, but he had 4 even strength goals and had 3 even strength assists. That's really solid for Sebastian Aho overall. None of them turned out to be game winners, but you got Jarvis, who put up 4 goals and 4 assists for 8. Aho with 4 goals, 3 assists for 7. That's really good to have for the fact that you got one of your alternate captains and one of the guys who I think is eventually going to have a letter on his chest in Jarvis. You need those 2 guys to get rolling, because right now those are your 2, I think, faces of the team offensively, at least, while Slavin could be your defensive face, or Kendra Miller, or however you want to go there with that. But Aho and Jarvis are your guys. These are your I say superstars, honestly, and I know, some people might disagree with that, but you look at what Aho's done in his career for the Hurricanes. He has a lot of these records already broken. By the time his career is done, he's probably going to have a lot of records held by the Hurricanes that he's going to take over from Eric Stahl, and someone that you can put on your Mount Rushmore of the greatest Hurricanes of all time. And the fact that his running mate in Seth Jarvis could eventually get there too, because he's on a path that could catch what Aho is doing. But you look what Aho's done. 15 shots on goal out of 26 attempts. That's a 26.7%. That's really good, all things considered. The fact that you look at his running mate in Jarvis, who was like 17%. And Aho's at 26. Yeah, he took maybe less shot attempts, but he's got a good amount of goals there. 140 shifts, which was 23.3 on average. 122 minutes and 17 seconds of total ice time, which does average to 20 minutes and 22 seconds. Now, in terms of faceoff, he was 42.2%, 146, but did lose 63. 4 block shots, 12 hits, 1 takeaway, 11 giveaways. But Aho, he's definitely putting out a lot of hits over the road trip. And even during the last couple of games, he was really throwing the body around, really blocking a lot of shots, especially on the PK2 or even on the power play against the Avalanche in overtime. He looked absolutely gassed. So you know that he was really putting his all into it. I think it's just that dad strength because of the fact he's a new father. Over the last few months, I think he's getting that extra boost because everyone always talks about it. When you're a new dad, especially in the NHL, you kind of get that dad strength. And that's kind of where he's running on right now. I think that's I'm not saying that's a contributing reason or the reason, but you have to think, okay, maybe it's some good mojo for the fact that he's, having a child with his wife and all that stuff. That's kind of, giving them some extra boost. And you see where he's at on this hot start, so you're feeling pretty good about where you're at with Sebastian Aho. But you got Jarvis and Aho going 8 points and then 7 points. That is a pretty good thing. That's pretty good, all things considered, when you really look at where the Hurricanes are at with those two guys running on the pace they're at right now. You definitely need it with how, the road trip went. You went 4-2, but they're kind of leading the way. You still got, like I said, other guys contributing on the road trip, which is what you definitely need. And the fact that they're doing it gives you a good indication of where the Canes are at. Now, this is where you probably look, okay, are you looking at someone on the defense? Is there another forward you would look at as the number 3 spot in terms of guys to kind of be like, who were the standouts? For me, it's kind of tough because I would say honorable mentions, you got to look at what Sean Walker's done, off the score sheet defensively, been really good. You got to look at, what Jalen Chatfield's done off the score sheet. He's been, pretty productive as well. You could look at, Jordan Stahl, Jordan Martin, Taylor Hall. Though a lot of those guys were putting up a lot of, efforts as well. I would say, like, you could look at Brandon Bussey and you could say, yeah, you got to give it to him. I think he's probably one of the closest honorable mentions to the top 3 list for what he did on the road trip, especially when the Hurricanes are out with Peter Kochetkov. You're like, okay, how is the goaltending going to be? But that being said, for me, you almost have to give it to Frederik Andersen, especially in the game against Colorado, where he saved 44 or 48, which is the most in one game for his career. He did go 2-1-0 on the trip, 183 minutes and 52 seconds of total ice time, of course. He averaged 61 minutes and 17 seconds, which helps because of the overtime in the shootout. He had 89 saves on 97 shots, only give up 8 goals in the 3 games with a shooting percentage of .918. That's pretty dang good, all things considered, and the fact of just where the team is at this point, too. You definitely need something like that. And the funny part is, he did have a penalty because he got into that skirmish against the Anaheim Ducks. But all in all, those are some numbers you really need from Frederik Andersen, especially in the game against Colorado, because that's a pretty tough matchup. We look at a guy like Freddie right now, who just the overall season has a 2.72 goals against and a 901 save percentage. But like I said, you look at that road trip, he was a 918 save. That's looking at a 917 against, Colorado, a 958 against Anaheim. Yeah, he had an 880 against Vegas, but I mean, that's to be said for a team who shoots a lot of pucks. But, doesn't allow teams to shoot a lot of pucks, but, if one or a couple get in, it is what it is. But overall, though, you have to feel pretty good where you're at with Frederik Andersen. And I think his performance against Colorado, if there's any faults in that game, where the fact that Colorado did come back in that game when we talked about it was absolutely insane. Without him, that game goes completely differently. And he stood tall, went 3 for 3 in the shootout. And I think that's what he definitely, I think for me, while there's a lot of great honorable mentions, like I said, Bussey, you could look at, Hall and all the other forwards and even some of the defensemen too. I think Frederik Andersen, based on what he had to do in Colorado to keep them in that game and how he did overall, I think that's pretty solid for 3 games out of that road trip. So for me, my 3 standouts: Jarvis, Aho, Andersen. If you're on the YouTube side of things, let me know in the comments who were your 3 standouts for the Hurricanes on the road trip. Now, that being said, we talked about this stay for a road trip by the numbers, the 3 standouts, but what were the 1 positive and the 1 negative for the Carolina Hurricanes on this 6-game road trip over the State Fair, 2 weeks that they had there? Stick around, we'll talk about it here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Hockey season is officially here, and nothing beats being in the arena for those opening games. But let's be real, getting tickets can be a total headache. Between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout, it's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your team. That's where Game Time comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NHL tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. Their zone deals are a game changer. You pick the section, Game Time picks your seats, and you save big. How big? You can find NHL tickets for under $25. So, that being said, take the guesswork out of buying NHL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Welcome back to a segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so for us to wrap up the show, we're going to talk about the one positive and the one negative coming out of the road trip. And you guys know me. I try to stay optimistic as possible. We do have to, call things out as they need be throughout the show, even throughout the season. I know you guys all heard me kind of rant and rave about the Utah game was it November, December, and stuff like that when they were going on that weird back and forth of winning and losing. So, but usually I try to stay positive when it comes to stuff like this because it's a long season and, it's easy to kind of be like, oh, the sky's falling or whatever. But for this, I think you kind of have to talk about it. So we'll start with the negative and end on a positive. The one negative is the power play. Power play overall stinks. You're 2 for 29 on the season overall. You're like 6.7 or 6.8%. It's a very bad percentage. Like you're creeping almost closer to the 6 to 5, and that's not great. And the fact that the Hurricanes are only 31st is still surprising. There's a team even worse than the Hurricanes on the power play, which is kind of crazy to think about. And you saw them go with 5 forwards at one point. Didn't really do anything. You look at the Colorado game. You get like 5 power plays, didn't score 1, and like I said, you had 5 offensive guys all in one power play. And Rod Brind'Amour even said against the Dallas game, special teams killed them. They should have scored on the power play, and the fact that they haven't scored very much is very telling. And it's crazy to think you look at a team that's at a 6.8%, 6.9%, and you're talking 2 out of 26. That's not great. It's very troubling for a team that's great on the PK. Yeah, maybe it's not, top 3 right now, but they're still top 10. But you can't rely on your PK to save you all the time. And the fact is you're getting these opportunities, but you're not scoring. And there's been a bunch of different combinations and nothing's worked. At some point, you got to figure out what's going on with the system and actually fix it because you can say you're working on it, but nothing changes. Is it really benefiting anyone? So I think if there's one negative to come out of this road trip, I think it's just the power plays just got to get going. And luckily, the Hurricanes are playing right now great 5-on-5 like they usually are, and they're shut down the PK. But at some point, your power play's got to get rolling because you cannot rely on even strength to lead the way all the time because you are going to get power plays. And the thing is, fans aren't expecting to score on every single power play. It might be 1 out of 3. There might be some nights where you do go 0 for 3. Okay, that happens. But if you go 1 for 4 the next game, or 2 for 4 the next game, or 2 for 3, or whatever the number is, at least offset 0 for 5, 0 for 4, stuff like that. At least try to keep it to where it's okay. You're 3 out of 10. Okay, that's still 30%. That's really good. You're 2 out of 10. Okay, that's still decent. You're at least still putting up numbers. You're still in a respectable range because power plays in the 20 to 30% range is really good, all things considered, especially if you're in the 30s. But if you're in the 20s, okay, that's respectable for the most part. But when you're 6.9%, that is very troubling for a team that has aspirations to go to a cup final, go win a Stanley Cup. And if you want to make deep runs like that, you got to play well in the playoffs. Yeah, they scored 10 power play goals back in the 25 playoffs earlier this year, but that was the playoffs. That's a different team now. And right now, you got a couple extra additions, but now it feels like it's just rather if it's the cash pop power play or the whatever it's called now, it's not clicking. It's not cashing in, and you've got to figure out at some point something's got to happen. So, like I said, for me, the one negative out of the road trip, it's definitely going to be the power play, and hopefully something gets figured out soon because we got like 2 games left in October between Vegas and the Islanders. You don't want to roll into November and your power play is still struggling because it doesn't get any easier from here. Now, like I said, we weren't going to start with the negative because we want to end this on a positive note because you guys know me, love to be optimistic and try to be more on the positive side of things. The one positive, the depth of the Carolina Hurricanes is definitely something to be happy about. Cam Abbott and this coaching staff in Chicago and the fact they run the state systems of the Hurricanes, it gives the guys that are coming up the comfortability to be like, okay, I know the system because we run the exact same thing here in Chicago that the Hurricanes do in Carolina. Yes, the speed is completely different from the American to the National League, but you're feeling pretty good. It's like, okay, these guys can come in and feel like they've been there for a bit. Joel Nystrom, Charles Alexis Legault, they felt like they've been there. And, well, there's some hiccups, yes, because you're talking about rookie guys going against really good teams in the middle of a gauntlet run between Vegas, Colorado, Dallas, and now you got Vegas coming up on Tuesday. But you're feeling pretty good about yourselves, the fact that these guys held their own for the most part and didn't get overwhelmed by the moment, and they kind of knew where they needed to be. Will there be some growing pains? Yes. Rookies making debuts. That's some tall orders to ask for, but they held their own for the most part. That's something you can really be happy about, the fact that the Hurricanes' depth and the fact that everyone's pulling on the same rope. It's the next man up mentality is that you're without Slavin, you're out Gossesbear, Miller, Robinson, Carrier, and the team is still finding ways to score goals, still finding ways to stay competitive and losing close games or winning close games. That has to give you some good indication of the fact that the depth doesn't make you fear, okay, if we add this guy up, how much of a detriment or how much of a hole we're in. But now you're like, okay, you're still losing or winning 1-goal games. Whether it's regulation, overtime, or shootouts, you're staying competitive. You're not getting blown out like some other teams are, or you're getting shut out or whatever. You're staying competitive as a team despite having 6 regulars out, and you're dipping into your 14th, 15th forward, and you're dipping into your 8th, 9th defenseman on your depth chart, but you're still getting the job done. I think that's what you have to feel like if you're the Carolina Hurricanes, is the young guys are all right, and the depth is going to be there for you. Whether if you have to go there, you can do it. And the fact you're on your 3rd-string goalie already in Brandon Bussey, when no one had an idea how he's going to be. Obviously, if people want, the ones who kind of watched him in Providence and stuff like that, even the goaltending coaches and the scouts are like, we trust this guy. And he's played very well without Kochekov in net. You feel comfortable with having him play 3 games on a road trip. Before, you would see Freddie play 5 of those 6 games, but they didn't have to. They were able to go to Brandon Bussey. So the depth is there for the Hurricanes, and I think that's what's really going to help them out this season, that with the injuries like this, you can still rely on these guys to at least be at a point where you can still be competitive. Will it be a lot more challenging than it was before with a full healthy roster? Yes, but you're still going to be able to go win games and still keep it competitive to where you're still getting the points. Right? If it's the full 2 or 1, you can still be on a streak of getting those things done. So I would say the one positive coming out of the road trip, the depth gives you an indication that, you might be down some guys, but you can still be a very competitive hockey team. So for me, my one negative on the road trip, the power play is still very much struggling, but the positive, you feel really good about your depth. So like I said, for the 3 Hurricane standouts, if you're on the YouTube version of the show, let me know in the comments. Leave me your one positive and your one negative. And if you're on socials, hit me up at OneTrueZach on X or Twitter, however you want to call it. Give me your 3 standouts and give me your one positive and negative for the road trip. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that, because we've been on a great run of getting a lot of subscribers recently. We're up to 1,616. Last Monday, we hit 1,600, and already we're getting a lot more. So thank you to everyone who's been subscribing. Thank you to everyone who's been commenting, sharing the show, and all that stuff. We are really trying to strive here to be a daily source for Carolina Hurricanes content. So big thank you to everyone who stuck around during these two crazy weeks of a road trip out west with 10 p.m. starts and all that stuff. And now we're back on the East Coast and getting a lot more reasonable time starts for these games. But thank you for everyone in the support. Make sure to keep leaving comments, sharing this, and all that's good stuff. And let's just keep this train rolling, because the team's officially home. And now we're going to look forward to 7 p.m., 6 p.m. start times and all that good stuff. But guys, until then, this will be the Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneTrueZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky, the Zachary Martin, where if you click the link to my bios, you can find all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. Have been putting out a lot of stuff over the last few days. We're talking, short-term and long-term call-up options. Bradley and the Doe getting called up. Game previews. Guys need to, start figuring things out, all the good stuff. So make sure you go check out thehockeywarriors.com to get all of our content on those side of things. If you want to check out my other podcasts, it's the Searchcast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, we are on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure you leave a 5-star rating and review, because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe. Hit the bell notifications so you don't miss a show. Hit the thumbs up to notify the show as well. Share with other Caniacs so they become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Monday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.